Megan and I last night, we were here till pretty late. And it's like one of the things that Megan and I play a role in our partnership is the best way to think of it is the mission would be to say, produce something. And I play the role of reporter where I have a gazillion ideas and want to write everything. And Megan plays the role of editor, which is kind of like wrong, makes no sense. And so we go back and forth into tension, arguing and debating. And I think until like 11:30 last night, like I was trying to jam 3 different presentations into one, and Megan then says, you have like 3 presentations you're trying to force into one.
Trying to make it all connect.
And so
we still want to teach all of it today,
but
don't we?
It's 3 different presentations. So let me pull up my PowerPoint, and you can get a view of kind of what I mean.
I love the people that are here. Zahid, he's from Flu Zone. They make Icy Hot and Gold Bond. I appreciate the Icy Hot. When you have back pain, no,
that's true.
The people on this, there is, if you have a problem, throw it into the chat. Somebody here probably has a solution.
This is very true.
That's okay.
Yeah. If you have a back problem, I'm sure we can get a friends and family
Icy
discount
hot
for you in
things.
Icy Hots, but although they're kind of cheap. Okay, so I'll show you the title page, but before I go there are 3 parts. One is tied to the fact of industrial age BS. So BS is not an acronym we invented. I think most of you know what that means. Bullshit in French, right? So industrial age BS, and then I put and more because another component was all around the notion of community and how community is changing. Our weekly leadership and practice class literally comes from the previous week's activities, coaching, interactions, podcasts, people we interact with all the time. And so it's taking a fraction of those interactions and creating a class, oftentimes taking pictures off of slides and images drawn on our walls. So if you see the messy handwriting, it's a lot of my handwriting as well, but Megan's always like yelling at me, editing and whatnot while we do this. But one is around this notion of community and how that's changing. And then the last part that initially we were going to make the whole class on this is the notion of managing our fears. I think COVID has driven this further for most people, which is a lot of suffering. Mental health issues have skyrocketed, and people are kind of isolated and alone. And the notion of how do you create the half-lifing of your suffering? How do you take something you're struggling with your fears and half-life it? It's like caffeine. But in this case, you want to get it out of your system. I guess caffeine eventually to go to bed. How do you half-life it? How do you half-life it? And so walk through the process of doing that. So with that said, let me go right to the title page. And sort of almost accidentally, I think, honestly, we did not know.
Has anybody read this book? Never heard of it? Never saw it? But if you Google industrial age BS and look at images, this is what comes up. So that's what we used.
Yeah, that was a weird one to pop up.
Bullshit
That someone
jobs.
actually wrote a book called Bullshit Jobs, and I'm sure most of us could read it, and I'm sure even for most of you faculty at West Point are probably like, it's like someone's like talking about my job and my work. A lot of us are stuck in, I think, what you may not want to tell your boss this, but the notion of bullshit jobs. We'll go into this interesting podcast talking about this notion of what they call the job loop, being constrained in a box of rules and a box of tightly defined things you're supposed to do, and that's called your job. And how that's changed, except most of us are still operating looking for that box, whether we realize it or not. So there's a question sometimes like, the bullshit job, is it imposed upon you by your leader, boss, manager, or are you doing it yourself, and who's doing what? And usually it's a combination of both. But so we're going to go into this a little bit, right? So I'm going to just start with this. If you don't mind, I'm just going to give you 3 presentations, and then you can just figure out, if depending on chat and whatnot, we can skip different parts.
We might
right?
just do 1. We might do 2. We could get to 3. It's based on what you guys want.
So
all right.
I liked this. This phrase is often said a lot, that change is very painful. Change is painful for most people. Change is even more painful for entire teams of people. And then when you have organizations or enterprises, say like the Army, or it could be even a new school. It doesn't matter which group it is. The greater the identity, the brand that you might feel, the harder it is to change. Because the longer the history, the more you have built, It's almost like fossilizing everything so that change just becomes very painful. But change starts to occur when staying the same is more painful than going down the path of change. And history, those who went on the culture tour this morning, when we looked at the history of kind of when the agricultural age shifted to the industrial age, that history showed that every 100 years there's a change that occurs. And the change started usually 20% of the way into a new century, meaning everyone glands onto the old models, the old ways to operate until it starts to fall apart. So change begins at around the 20% mark. And then there's a podcast we listened to that was saying that change actually completed around 40% of the way into the new century. In this sense of the industrial age, they were talking about how the move from the pursuit of more land literally ended with the conclusion of World War II, where everyone built more machines to go and conquer more land, to then realize it wasn't about having more land. And that was kind of the end of the agricultural age. So let me take you through this. So I think Laura should be able to play a podcast for us. I'm going to have to mute this so they can play it. There's a guy named Vasant Dar. He was one of the top data scientists on Wall Street. And then he built a hedge fund focused on just data science and data mining using data algorithms, artificial intelligence. And so, like most people during COVID, just built a podcast. His is called The Brave New World. And Albert, can't say his last name, Wenger, is a senior partner at Union Square Ventures. It's probably one of the preeminent private equity venture capital firms in the New York City area, if not in the world. It actually happens, Albert kids goes to our kids' school, Avenues. So I've been invited to several dinners we're supposed to meet, but we never connected. But very small world. Vasant actually is an investor in our company, so I've known him for almost 20 years, but very, very sharp guy. And then this quote on the right, which will come through on the podcast a little bit, because I'm going to have Laura play less than 3 minutes. But there's a quote around the notion that science works literally in tandem with funerals. I think of scientists and I think of the word experiment. People who are experimenting. A scientist doesn't have to be someone who's working with test tubes and labs, but a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders are trying all kinds of different ways of how we should operate at work, as leaders, as jobs. And the experimentation comes right around the vicinity of funerals. Funerals being something dies, something stops working. And so you'll see that the level of experimentation gets crazier as you get closer to a funeral. So maybe, Laura, can I turn it over to you to play the podcast for us?
Sounds good. So if you stop sharing, I will start sharing. Can I get a thumbs up that you can see the screen? And then I'm going to mute. And if someone could give me a thumbs up as well when you start hearing the audio, that would be great.
So how did we get here? How we shifted from sort of the industrial age to, let's call it the knowledge era, or I'm going to call it that. What's gotten us there, and why have we been caught by surprise?
Well, for starters, I do call it the knowledge age in the book, but I don't think we're there yet. We haven't gotten there. In fact, we're stuck in the industrial age. And there is a similar thing that happened at the end of the agricultural age. So if you think about the agricultural age, once all these machines started being invented and once industry came along, who was in power at the time? Well, the people who were in power at the time were the people who controlled land. That land was the source of wealth. Land was the source of power. And when they saw what these industrial outfits could do, they didn't think, oh, here comes the industrial age. We need to shift to the industrial age. We need to make all these changes in society. Instead, they were like, oh, great, we can have more land. And the way we're going to do this is by building battleships and tanks and fighting wars. I make the argument that the transition from the agrarian age to the industrial age was really quite brutal. It involved numerous revolutions, and ultimately it didn't really conclude until the end of World War II. It was World War II that finally completely destroyed, for the most part, land as the source of power in the world and substituted industry as the source of power. And I think we're finding ourselves in a very similar moment in time. The people who are powerful politically either directly or by indirection through ways of spending money, are concerned about capital and the accumulation of capital. In this case, financial capital, which is related to physical capital in ways that we can discuss, but they hold power today. And when they see what computers can do, what digital technology can do, they're not saying, oh, it's our job to invent the knowledge age or the post-industrial age. They're like, hey, how can we have more capital?
Mhm.
So it's like all his, as Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. So it's not exactly the same thing, but there's a pretty strong analogy, and it's for that reason that most politicians have tried to fix the industrial age. They haven't tried to make big dramatic changes. They've tried to make small incremental changes, and they've tried to patch the system. So the industrial age is something in my mind like at least 30 years past its expiration date, but we've kind of artificially held it together, and we've held it together through means like quantitative easing and various subsidies to various industries and job training programs, but it's working less and less. And the fact that it's working less and less.
Laura's handing it back to us, right?
Sharing right.
If you get a chance, it's a cool podcast. It's worth a listen. But I just want to show parts of it that were some bullets later on. This idea that, once again, change doesn't occur until it's more painful to stay the same. I'm going to use this term industrial age BS, that the change is happening because it's too painful not changing. Said another way, we're reaching a pinnacle of that pain. Things are breaking down in ways that I think a lot of leaders, the people who are older, maybe in charge, are struggling to understand. This worked before, this worked, and why it won't work. And we're hearing this across almost every industry. This notion of kind of, if you go even further back, where human beings were foragers, right? You go and find food, find stuff. And then they moved into this agricultural age where like it was all about who had more land and higher quality land. And then it moves to this industrial age where it's all about having more capital. If you had more money, if you had more gold, you can buy better machines, build better tanks, and conquer others. And there's a notion of kind of capital was the driver of just being able to do more in the industrial age. A new era, this knowledge era, people call it the information age, the knowledge era. It's interesting if you look at the evolution of what happened in the internet, sort of like tech space. The very first layer of companies who became the most successful internet companies built infrastructure. The infrastructure just to even let the internet occur, like AOL allowed you to dial up to the internet. Then came the application layer. So people started building software applications. Then came the intelligence layer. And what's interesting about the intelligence layer is the biggest internet companies like Google and Amazon are just databases. They're databases matching information of whether it's your credit card with shopping preferences against SKUs or search data, Facebook with their data. The biggest tech companies are connected to a level of intelligence that was built. This notion that Albert mentions is the industrial age, in his view, is easily 30 years past its expiration date, but it's artificially being held together, and yet it's working less and less. And I like this question Vasant asks, like basically, how did this catch us by surprise? Like, do you feel like kind of wasn't this happening? Weren't the signs there?
Shouldn't we have seen this?
It's almost like climate change. At some point, I mean, I don't know if you ever watched those movies where the whole planet just burns down and everything just starts falling apart. And everyone's like, God, how did it catch us by surprise? And what's interesting, if you look in history, is this is always how change occurs. We act like it caught us by surprise, but by the window, we're talking about how did it catch us by surprise. That's the litmus test, the signal that we're getting to the pinnacle point of pain. The pinnacle point of it's not working, so it feels almost foolish and ridiculous to talk about, let's make some rules, let's like micromanage, let's do every old form of management that's out there.
Well, that's holding on to what you know, right? That's much more comfortable, right? I don't want anything to change, so I'm just going to keep holding on. If you really knew it was going to create a revolution or there's going to be a world war, or if you knew those things, you wouldn't have that wouldn't happen, right? But
Like,
it's like
it's
almost
always,
like you need the pain.
it's always like the aha is
After.
aha after the
in
fact.
hindsight.
Sometimes immediately after, oh, you go to battle, and I mean, War II, I think what took almost 5 years or so. Like after all that destruction and death and
Like,
whatnot, you're like,
mm.
this was not worth the fight. Like getting more land wasn't the key. Like, and so that insight happens later. But it was interesting later in this podcast, they talk about how history shows that rules and regulations are written by people protecting the old industry. And they use this example of when cars first started to show up. Well, the rules and regulations were written by the people who sold and managed horse-drawn carriage businesses. So they made all these rules that cars were dangerous and that you had to put a person with a flag running in front of the car, and the car should not be allowed to go faster than horse-drawn carriages. That notion that generation that's protecting all their kind of history and assets are the ones writing the rules. And they will fight and keep doing that until it completely falls apart or until the tipping point occurs.
That's human nature, I guess.
And that's just kind of human nature. So I'll just give you an example. These are slides from a proposal we had put together recently. Let me just walk you through this with the left first. We use this example of looking at the change in the role of leadership, that old versus new definition. And we compared it to what happened in watching TV with commercials. That the old form of leadership is kind of like being forced to watch TV and it's blaring commercials at you and you can't skip it. Well, then comes TiVo and DVR and you're like, this is great. I can record it, all right, and then watch it when I want. And I get to fast forward the commercials. Well, and then now there's on demand. Like you can watch when you want and you can skip the entire thing. And so like it just changed the game. When we look at leadership, and I'll walk you through the slides on the right, leadership used to be driven by leaders dictating. Said another way, authority figures yelling at you, right? Loud voices speak with clarity. You will do what I tell you because I outrank you. And these are slides we got 5 years ago from one of the top groups within Air University. There's a group called PACE that was created, and they got folded into Air University. And by the way, when we got these slides, we thought it was awesome, right? This notion of mandated versus organic leadership, right? Mandated leadership is I outrank you, so you're going to do this. And there's a part where it's not to say that.
And by the way, sorry, they didn't call it yelling and coddling. We added that very simple language on top of it, that the mandated, we look back at it now as a simple way to describe it is you're yelling, right? You're mandating things to get done, top down. The bottom up, the more organic can be like coddling. That was our language. It was just saying PACE didn't give us.
And one of the interesting things when you look in history is when things are starting to go haywire, that the point at the inflection of change, usually the thing that occurs is a 180-degree flip-flop. It's almost like mandated or dictated leadership didn't work, so they flip-flop to the other side. It's all about listening. It's all about empathy. It's all about trying to survey and find what you want. I mean, if you look at what happened with COVID and work from home and hybrid and whatever you want solutions, it literally flip-flops. And that shows up almost in every field in history. When this starts not working, the knee-jerk reaction is to do the opposite.
I mean, Chris from the Navy was saying COVID has forced industry to change, right? Virtual working, education, meetings is one example, but I'm sure there are other innovations, meaning COVID was
an accelerator
towards change, as an example, right? And now that's why we're feeling so much pain and change, and nobody knows what to do, and is flip-flopping from work from home is better, no, being in the office is better, no, I want hybrid, nobody knows what to do.
And I would argue most of the debates and discussions are all on the wrong topics. And they're getting very knee-jerk reactionary to, I like this, I don't like this, I want this. And it's almost stepping back. And most times when you need to redo strategy, redo decision-making, you got to go back to what's changed. What are the variables that have changed before you start to react to hey, well, that didn't work, let's do the opposite. This was a slide that we had gotten from one of the top neuroscientists in the world, this guy, Jim Fadigan. He's the guy who invented the Sesame Street characters, Cookie Monster, Big Bird, just really, really smart guy. And he had given a talk that goes, I mean, it's crazy how far back, but he was saying, if you look in history and this 100-year, it's not an overnight thing. you go back to the 20th century, the top driver of success was natural resources, whether it had to do with land, maybe land with oil and whatnot. Then it went to capital, who had more gold, who had more money. And then it's moved to technology, and it's shifting to human capital. And if you look back in the 20th century, human beings was the bottom of the list, meaning, said another way, we were the least likely to make a difference. We were simply headcount. When they talk about manpower planning, headcount, these are all terms from the industrial age. We mattered least. If you had more money, right, the whole everyone's a number, you can replace them, just hire someone better. In fact, machines mattered more than people. And then it started shifting, right? This is not an overnight shift. And what's interesting is the list completely flipped. It flipped where the very bottom became the very top. And think about like now work from anywhere. I mean, talk about the value of real estate, right? Having offices somewhere, it matters less and less. The whole that you can connect in, zoom in, whatnot, that matters less. Capital, I mean, the world of Wall Street and capital wants to still talk about how capital is so important. It's mattering less and less. Most companies who are not doing well, the lack of not doing well or doing well has less to do with capital. I mean, if it was pure capital based, like Exxon should have just destroyed everyone at one point, but they kind of went from top to bottom and I think even fell off the S&P 500. I mean, they dominated the S&P 500, the most valuable public companies, and they fell off the list. Like I think it was 2 years ago, which is crazy. But when you think of human capital, right, when something becomes not important, but suddenly becomes the most important thing, it starts to have an impact everywhere. I think about the notion of how it impacts us at home, even in parenting. If you have children, and if you have your parents who ever look at you and how you're parenting your children, they kind of look at us like we're crazy, like just give them food and make them eat it. Like, why are you, I mean, the level of like dramatics and I mean, like I think I try to run, and my wife even more, like a Michelin restaurant to cut the dino nuggets in bite-sized chunks, but if it's too hot, not good, too cold, not good, but it has, I mean, it's like Jesus, right? That my parents never did that. You're eating what they served, and if you're not, you go hungry. Like there's so many elements of what's changed. And the notion of even, like, I mean, parenting, I remember like one of our board members, really smart guy, he like gave me some machine. It's called a baby bump or something.
Oh,
Or
yeah. No, it was like you put it on when you're pregnant.
When you're pregnant.
So that the music goes through the belly to make them smarter.
And
right?
it was to give your
Oh,
child an
right.
advantage before they even show up in the planet.
Let's
Like,
be honest. I tried it once. I heard that. I don't think
I
it
mean,
worked.
but it's like one of those like,
They're smart, but they
like-
have to work hard, man. That did not work.
yeah, but I mean, tell me as a parent, I'm sure some of you are like, what is it called? Like, I have someone like, you want to give everyone a little bit of an edge and thinking that makes a difference, right? You got 9 months advantage in the race, right? And the world's just getting more competitive. You think about work and even the role of followership. Most people were followers. Very few will ever become leaders versus now everyone needs to learn leadership. And what does that even mean? The whole notion of community. So I'm going to go into some of these, but like I always said, like, I don't know about you guys, but like I can be a neurotic like most of us. Like, when you have like your favorite pen. So this pen here is like my favorite pen. I got it as a gift from the
I don't think they
CIA.
relate. They're like, no, I don't know about a favorite.
But we have
pen."
like our favorite something,
Okay.
right?
Fine.
And you ever like lose it?
Go ahead.
And when you lose it, you literally think, I can't. Sorry, Megan, I can't present today until I find our pen. She's like, just use this. Like, it does the same thing, but you're looking for it. That notion of why does it become that precious? Well, human capital, right? Human capital from, our children, our top employees. We've done some coaching of MBA athletes and MBA coaches. You should see what a bunch of pansies they are. Scared of everyone's ego and what they're going to say and do. I mean, that's just the reality. Everyone's scared to hurt everyone's feelings because it's like the pen. If I drop this pen and it breaks, oh my God. And of course, I can buy another one, but it's like, when it becomes that precious, we start to act differently. When it's at the very bottom, it's not that important. We also act differently, right? What the hell, throw it out, I'll get a new one.
My parents let us stay out when we were younger, like just come back when it's dark out. It's like now it's like, oh my God, you can't go outside without your parents. I know Mac used to walk through New York City when he was little in the 80s, and that you don't do that anymore. Like that doesn't happen. You can't do that.
And
They're like
so
precious commodities.
several different lip classes we've been talking about, as this shift has occurred, the role of what human beings are supposed to do has materially changed. And we have to recognize that it worked before. There's a reason why, all the rules and the industrial age BS in our organizations exist, because at number 4, at the bottom of the list, that's exactly what was expected and what produced the optimal results for teams and enterprises and organizations. Well, this thing shifted. And with that shift came, what are human beings supposed to do? The podcast actually talks a lot about what technology is doing, and they talk about how it's unfortunate how people are fighting for these roles that machines can easily do better. And their wages are getting smaller and smaller and shrinking because they need to realize, stop fighting for jobs that machines can clearly do better. So what is that unique new role for human beings? And this slide's a little busy, but let me walk you through kind of what it means. It's tied to decision making. BMBY stands for better me versus better you. One of the things you always think about is we are all students, but also teachers. We always are selfish, but we also are selfless, helping others. So we have to train ourselves. I always think of filling our own cup, then we spill over onto others. In the 20th century, most of better me was making money. In fact, in the podcast, they talk about what they call the job loop versus the knowledge loop. In the job loop, there are really two things that human beings did.
Make money and spend money.
Yeah,
right?
well, so like you went to work, right, in a very tightly defined box, and you worked to get paid. And then you went and you spent the money, and you can also give it and help other people, but you spent the money, and when you bought a washing machine, it made your life materially better. And there were a lot of things that we bought that made our lives materially better. And that was a capitalistic society where money solved most problems and enhanced life. Well, we got to a point where at some point, like the minimum that we needed started to get covered. And as we moved into this knowledge era, the value of what a human being is supposed to do is actually twofold on a better me, better you basis. Making decisions, your judgment. I'll go into that a little bit more a little bit later. But decision making and advice are the same thing on just opposite sides of the coin. When I make a decision, when I apply my judgment, right, I action something that impacts other people. They always talk about the second and third order consequences of anyone's decision. When I give someone advice, I am influencing or trying to guide and coach their decision making. They're the exact same thing from opposite ends. And what you'll find is this: in the knowledge era, we put the human brain's ability to make decisions. There are two parts to it that we often forget. And so I'm reading my own handwriting here. One is to be able to be a great decision maker. And this is what's synonymous with leadership now. Leadership, you can define it as great speeches, inspiration, motivation, take care of. At the end of the day, what's expected in your job description as a leader is to make great decisions every day, big and small. Your judgment call matters. You will see in every organization, when you have poor judgment, you start getting demoted pretty fast. Now, you might not get a title demotion, but you will start to see the best people, the best players on your team or organization start to run away from those with bad judgment. Because it almost feels like, well, you could influence through your advice, right, my decisions. And people gravitate towards those who make good decisions. And so when you think of decision making, like most things for human beings, there's a dial down and a dial up nature. And we'll cover this a little bit. When I think about dial down, Cindy's not here yet, right? Is she on? Oh, she's on her way. Okay, so Cindy, she's one of the top nutritionists in the world. We met her through Jim Lear and his institute. Is an amazing individual and amazing Cindy. But they always use this term for athletes, the level of preparedness. How prepared are you, right? In the military, it's called readiness, right? For like we have the Winter Olympics going on, you need to be prepared. And then the dial up is going and, competing or fighting or whatever you have to do. Dialing down, to be a great decision maker, you have to focus on how to get prepared to be able to deal with the gazillion types of all unexpected VUCA, they say, volatile, uncertain, and complex, ambiguous data points coming at you so that you can go and act. So we'll talk about this a little bit. But when it comes to advice, and I put here, Google search is actually one of the more deadly forms of decision-making advice. You know, we go to Google Forms now, or Google search, and as you autofill, I think autofill is even worse. Talk about confirmation bias. If you start typing something in autofill and it shows you, you're like, that must be the right answer.
Or that must be the question I was trying to ask. Yes, that's exactly it. And then you feel validation. Other people are asking this. So this is a problem everybody else has. And you're more likely to want to.
I was trying to find this thing. I think it was Tim Ferriss who showed this. There was a slide with like a whole bunch of brains, and every brain is a different color. But then it talks about how one person speaks up and says, you know what, everyone's thinking orange. And what happens for most people, we don't like to speak up and create conflict. Human beings by nature tend to avoid conflict. So most of us will not say, no, I'm not thinking orange. We actually say nothing. So the person that's saying we're all thinking orange starts to believe that everyone's agreeing through silent agreement. By not speaking up, we all think we're all thinking orange, right? And before you know it, everyone starts thinking everyone else is thinking orange. And so the whole room starts to act like they're thinking orange when the reality is we have many different thoughts going on. That notion of confirmation biases, that notion of groupthink, it's very dangerous because we talked last week about the relevance of advice, situationally relevant advice being critical. So let me jump a few slides here. I'm going to try to compare the body to the mind. I don't think there are many people these days who actually will say refined flour and processed sugar is good for you. I think, in fact, it's been written about so much that you kind of think of it almost like poison, right? I think that's not like new news, but if someone here is like, totally disagree, refined flour and processed sugar is a daily part of what I take, almost like vitamins. I don't think anybody does this anymore.
I don't think anybody
right?
takes it as vitamin.
I think we agree it's bad for you, right? Now, if I told you that at your workplace, we have a cafeteria, daily refined sugar and daily, refined flour and processed sugar, right? Are there two top ingredients we use in every meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner? And by the way, it's free, right? It's subsidized at times because, maybe we can't afford it for free, but it's generally free. Every day you go to work, you are doing what we call reps. And in this case, you're going to eat two things that are really bad for you every single day. What would you say if that was your workplace? Now, you can go outside and buy your own food, right? Or would you start to go on what the hell is going on around here? This place is trying to kill me, right? I mean, there will be discussions, committees, posts on social media, like what the hell's with West Point, right? There is flour and sugar as the top two ingredients. I'm not sure if this is true, but I think if it happened, people go crazy now, right? It's bad for us. And the fact that an organization, a team head enterprise who's supposed to take care of us is poisoning us on a daily basis 3 times a day, you're going to be like, this is just absolutely wrong. And that's for our body. So imagine for your mind, okay? For your mind, if you're, whatever the mind cafeteria is every day you go to work, you're doing daily industrial age BS. Daily industrial age BS, included for free just for coming to work. Subsidized at times, maybe if you're a consultant, right? So you don't fully have to be there all the time. But this notion of what happens when you are doing reps like this all the time. We had this discussion.
Maybe if the LIP community, and if you guys wanted to think about it for a second, put it into the chat. I am curious what people are thinking. Like when you try to compare the sugar and the flour on the body to the mind. What are the industrial age BS things that you think of that every day I'm going in and I'm doing that's bad for me, just like eating sugar or flour? I'm curious in the LIP Army if you guys wanted to just punch in. What are you thinking? Are you following us? What are you thinking? Anybody here? Gossip at the water cooler. anybody going to be brave and throw something out? What's the processed sugar? Initially would not compare the two. What do you mean by that, Terry? So specific work hours and limited autonomy, staying in your own lane, frustration, checking on people.
Specific work hours is definitely in there, right? That the clock in, clock out. You might not have a machine to clock, but it's kind of expected. There's a lot of leaders, and if you know this, the way they control some of that is by having the check-in meeting at exactly the time they want you before, and the check-out meeting, right?
Feeling guilty for using my 2 15-minute breaks for my lunch. Waiting for yes, reading email. Message being delivered is completely opposite of expectation. Commuting for an hour and a half.
This interesting discussion that we had with this airman, this leader from the Air Force. And it was talking about this notion of in training how to make decisions, get your judgment right. One of the top things was that you need the truth. You need people around you to tell you the truth, not obscure it. And the question was, what keeps you from telling the truth to others, but also what prevents truth from coming to you? And the response they got was, are you talking about that vulnerability stuff, right? Do I have to go into all that bullshit? That was literally the honest response. And the response this leader said was that, look, beyond the military, right? You know, one of the things, especially for those in service, is this, and even if you're in whatever job, you know, the movement is so high now. The chance of you spending the rest of your life until retirement in that same organization is close to zero, right? The average movement for just, if you look at the Bureau of Labor, is 18 months and going down, everyone moves jobs. If you are in the military, like it or not, you are kicked out before you're old enough to stop working. So you have to think of another career that starts afterwards. And this leader's reaction was that you have to recognize that we're not going to be able to survive outside the military. We are trained every day in so much industrial age bullshit. We're institutionalized so that when we go out, it's like going out from like Stone Ages to like, I can't make it here. And the biggest sort of like reason why truth doesn't come is that line of, I'm a veteran. And the reaction of this leader was, who's going to tell, I'm using exact words, who's going to want to tell a crusty veteran their truth? I mention all this because when I think about work and what's happening, every day we are getting trained in the culture, in the environment. And every day that we go through reps, it gets automated into our system.
I like how what Josh was saying. Basically, anything that doesn't require you to think, right? So it's like every day you're repping yourself and not thinking, whether it's following orders, instructions. And it's not that there's not a place for that. There are rules for a reason. There's times to follow. You can't always be leading, but you know, if you think about the school system, it's the same issue. The kids are still being taught to memorize as opposed to learn how to think. Now, a lot of them are changing.
What's interesting about the number one area that we are all thinking, what does my boss want?
Yeah.
What would make me look smart to my boss? Students are watching the teachers. What is the right answer? What does the teacher, winning the authority figures check approval? And we're so trained in it, we don't even recognize when we're doing it.
Teaching
it's like,
test.
Like imagine asking a question and someone answers and you're like, was that what you really think? They'll be like, well, is that the right answer? Isn't that what you thought? Like, well, what do you think? Well, I think what you think. It's that line from Pretty Woman, right? What's your name?
Whatever you want,
right? It's not that all of you watch that movie, but
we like that movie. We quote it a lot.
This movie, Shawshank, it's one of my favorite movies. You've ever seen it? Shawshank Redemption. Does anyone know this scene here? So the old guy, Brooks, he's been in jail since 1954, serving a 50-year prison sentence. 50 years, his whole life. He's about to get paroled. And in this scene, as he's about to get paroled, he takes a knife and wants to commit murder, a crime, right as he's about to leave jail. He wants to commit a crime so that he can stay in jail. Brooks had the foresight to know, I know how to operate and survive in this institution of prison. I don't believe I can make it if I go on the outside. Now, in the movie, it's unfortunate. He goes out and he cannot adjust to the outside world, and he ends his life. That notion of how scary it can be when you are trained and repped every single day and you are comfortable in this older environment that is no longer going to be there. Brooks knew what was out there. I don't know how many of you are coming to see the realization that you can blame whoever you want, but you are part of that change. And it's the pinnacle of pain where if you don't start finding a way to start to build a ramp into the knowledge era, and you think that working in a tightly defined box with a set of rules is going to work, and you don't have to think and apply judgment and decision making and learn these skills, I don't know what will happen to you, but you're going to face what Brooks faced. It's going to be scary. I'll go into a couple other thoughts real quick. I know that's kind of deep. So great movie though, but how community is changing, and there's some interesting things happening here too. And this is kind of what human capital falls to the top. I think about the notion of offense is human performance. When the #1 lever of success is human beings, human performance matters. The value, if you look in like say professional sports, the value of the top player to the bottom, I mean, it's like 1,000 to 1, 10,000 to 1. It's so stark. And it feels unfair at times. But that's because a team can perform, an enterprise can win with a single human being that performs better. And when you start to get small teams of human beings that perform better, they're worth more. When you people come see our office, we built this office with the intention of housing 300 to 400 employees. But as we saw this change occur, we found that having less people that are of higher density as a team of high performance was worth more than 300 to 400 people. This office houses 7 people, even though we have the square footage to house 300 to 400. We're not in a rush to just add more bodies because that's industrial age. Having one more quality is the key. I think of offense as human performance, high-level performance, defense in longevity, care, health, and so forth. This is a messy slide, but we're sharing this week with someone. We talked about the notion of how community has changed. I think of community 1.0 on the very left. It's like the caveman days, right? It's like the very bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You were part of a community or tribe so you can survive. Right? So you actually have food. If you hunted and you caught nothing today, someone else did and they might share. Protection and so forth. But if you look at Community 2.0, it's interesting. PEMS is a framework we got from Jim Lear, who Cindy's familiar with as well. It stands for physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And saying those are the 4 spectrums of kind of how human beings operate. The physical is like, exercise, nutrition, and sleep. Emotional has to do with our psychology. Mental is like technical skills. Spiritual is the act of helping other human beings. It's not about religion, but just helping other people. But think about the communities you belong to. They're very homogenous, meaning like you might be part of a church group, right? Or maybe part of a nonprofit, but you don't work out with those people. You are part of a different fitness community of if you're a 305 dancer, or maybe you're like part of this vegan group, or maybe you're part of an emotional support group because you lost someone, or you might be part of a technical group to learn like public speaking. We tend to not have the same person cut across all 4 spectrums. We belong to different pockets of people, and in fact, sometimes you'll find that we act like different people. I know people who are super, super kind when they hang out with their church friends. Then they go to a different group and they're complete assholes. It's like same person, right? Different people, different communities, different parts show up. Versus looking at Community 3.0, we talk about work, life, and whatnot. Think about the entire human being. And another way to look at it is this. In Community 2.0, most people cannot see all of you. And when you're getting advice, right, that's the flip side of decision making. It's going to be less accurate if they have a distorted or a biased view of you only from one side. Versus the communities that we believe are going to thrive are the ones where they get to see all of you. I get to get a view of you when you work out that showed up when you were now doing, like giving work, that showed up when you were trying to, do coding, that showed up when you were trying to do something else. The notion of seeing the whole person, the advice you get from those around you will be more accurate and more relevant. Relevancy is key, right?
Yeah, it's just so interesting because it's increasing your chances of I'm going to use Coach Mackey as an example. It's fascinating because I can see Mackey teaching. I can see him learning. I can see him play basketball with kids. I can see him run programs for adults. I can see him dance in the dance class. I can see how he is making lunch. I can see a better view of Coach Mackey, and it's fascinating how much. So the coaching is a lot more relevant when I can see different data points than when I can only see, say, Coach Mackey through basketball or through, teaching this lip extension course he was doing, but obviously more data points. But you can't, the idea that you would just be seeing small little data points and you're banking it, you're noticing it. You can't do that for everybody, right? But
the problem with the small data points is this.
You dismiss it if you're not
it's in the
proximity.
I was going to say it's like a poker game.
Yeah.
At the poker table, we're prepared to bluff.
Yeah.
Right. You put on those glasses so you can't read my eyes. I smile. I'm all happy. Right. We all know how to bluff. We all know how to play poker. Right. We call it LHFing, lying, hiding, and faking. We've all mastered it. In fact, if you haven't, I'm like, oof, you're in for a real treat because you're going to get butchered and sniped because you need to be able to focus on optics. You can't walk around saying, yeah, I hate you and hate you. I'm upset at everyone. I'm having a bad day everywhere. Like as adults, we learn to,
control that, hold it in a little bit.
Bluffing at the poker table, right? The problem is if you see someone only in one spectrum of a community, you often can only see their bluffing. When you see them across everything, you start to get the truthful view. You start to get the full view, and that matters. It's interesting. There are two experiments. In fact, this group at West Point will experience this today. In the last several weeks or months, we gave two different seven-figure grants that we're doing. One is working with this Michelin chef, Danny, where we're building the next Blue Zone. I'll talk about the Blue Zone in a second more. But the Blue Zone has been a study that's been done. Initially, there were 5 locations, expanded to 7, where they studied where people live the longest, right? Looking all around the world, and it's not even a country. There's like Okinawa, Japan. There's like specific cities where they found people live longer. Now, predominantly driven by nutrition, but there were a lot of other factors as well. And so Danny and us, we've been experimenting every week for the last 6 months on Thursdays, him coming cooking and trying different things. We got to a place, as we got to know each other, that we decided that we wanted to build the 8th Blue Zone in the world in this office. And so we gave him a grant to accelerate the experiments we do on this. And the goal of this was twofold. One was to build it to target elite leaders of the world, as in help them make better decisions in seconds. They run the world. On the flip side, we want to target the less privileged and figure out, and these were his words, how do we build CEOs out of public schools? So kind of that extreme spectrum. But the thing I want to focus on is number 2, cross-domain coaching. So we've had a team of people led by Mackey, who is one of the top basketball coaches, and then moved to youth sports, amazing coach here in the tri-state area, and then Mike Collette in Boston, who runs one of the top CrossFit outfits and gyms in the country. And they have been leading with a team of dancers and bar and other groups, this notion of, we say, you is you. The same you shows up while practicing taking a basketball shot, while doing a dance move, while doing a bar class, while doing a CrossFit exercise. And as you integrate and work out with other teammates, it shows up even more.
I think Monica's asking, can you only see this from is it the diverse behaviors that you're doing? I think it's more that it's harder to hide, bluff, like you were talking about LHF, when you're doing the things, say, that you like. If you like to dance, it's just harder to hide, if you see somebody in many different situations.
You're looking for patterns.
Looking for patterns.
You're looking for patterns.
In your core work, if it's so tied to your identity, right? It's harder for you you're going to be more likely to bluff. So those
you guys will experience this today, both in
at
dance
West
for
Point.
30 minutes and then basketball. It is cool. It is very cool. Because literally in that short window, it's like looking at a mirror. But as opposed to seeing the physical view of you, you're seeing what's in your head. what's actually happening. And it shows up in the way you interact in shooting basketball shots and the reaction you will give to your teammates. It will show up in the way you dance. So stay tuned for this. Some very cool stuff. We've learned more about individuals faster through this. So it's fascinating stuff there. This is the diagram if you ever look up blue zones. These were 3 locations, right? Loma Linda, somewhere in California, to like Okinawa in Japan and Sardinia in Italy. And they cross-sectioned how different places had different things, but what were the common themes? And what's out there is, look, you Google search, everyone's got an opinion on what you should do. That's what I call like kind of generic or blunt advice. Blunt advice can be so lethal, it could really hurt you. So be careful. But I like what we're doing with Danny on this. His emphasis was this: first and foremost, we want to focus on elevating human performance. We're not on this project to create an 8th blue zone. So we're going to say all the sick out there, if you have diabetes or cancer or anything like that, come here. No, that's not the beacon we're building. We're building the beacon around human performance. Olympic teams, like generals and enlisted and, like the heads of organizations that need to make sharper decisions and understanding the ways to integrate this into their life. The secondary goal is longevity and, all the elements. I mean, Danny's done some amazing things, including curing cancer with his daughter against the recommendation of the best doctors at Cornell Weill. He took nutrition as the only driver, no chemo, and literally put cancer into submission to the point where the doctor, who was screaming at his face, had to apologize but couldn't say it, couldn't look him in the eyes, and simply said to him, I don't know what the hell you're doing, but keep doing more of it because it's working. And he then became very close friends with the heads of Cornell Weill and whatnot. The guys connected in a gazillion ways. So tonight, we're launching the first set of experiments on the Blue Zone. You're going to experience it tonight. It'd be very cool. We've got bio wine guys. We've got foods that will make your brain sharper. We've got a biohacking expert around metrics and all these different individuals coming through. So just stay tuned for this.
Thank God red wine is good for you.
Red
Let's
wine is
find out
very
what,
good for you.
exactly what kind that is. Do
Yeah.
not take that away.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Managing our fears. The notion of how to half-life it. This was so Twitter read the inside then the out.
I think he's trying to prove to me that we can get through all 3 presentations at once. So we're just going to fly through this one, but it's 12 o'clock, just so you know.
Okay.
It's okay. We usually go a little bit over.
Just so you know, like the separation of 3 made a lot more sense
Yes.
than like having all
Do you
3
need a
in one
drink or a
presentation.
bathroom? You're getting some vitamin D. You can move, do what you need to do.
Is that my cue
Oh,
for
no.
cut off or no?
No, I'm just checking in with the group. No,
If you have questions and thoughts, just raise your
hand
hand or
Raise
put
your
it in the
hand or
chat.
Put it in the chat.
All right, this was interesting. So Naval's a well-known guy. He runs this group called Angel List, and people just love what he said. And he wrote, like, pain is a fact, suffering is a choice, right? I think a lot of us have heard similar phrases, right? Like kind of danger is real, but fear is made up, right? We've heard all types of similar themes, which is like, we hurt ourselves through suffering, meaning something bad happens. Another Columbia professor, Sri Kumar, says, something bad happens. It's like getting shot with an arrow, but then there's a second arrow that hits the exact same spot, and that arrow is always fired by us. And the reality is it's not one arrow that's fired. It's like 100, 1,000. I mean, we tend to put like bag loads of arrows, and we just kind of hurt ourselves more on something bad that happened, right? The example he uses is almost like, I can't remember the exact example, but we do this all the time, right? Something bad happens, and we do the.
How did I not see that? You just start to pummel yourself, and now all of a sudden something bad already happened, and you're making it 10 times worse.
And so Megan was the one. When I showed her this, her reaction was, "This is a really hard lesson to learn."
It's a really hard
Right?
lesson to
And
learn.
it takes practice. It takes reps to learn to dial down suffering, right? Self-inflicted suffering. And the reality for most of us is we don't know how to do that.
Mhm.
And so we end up doing the exact wrong things. Now, we shared in the class last week. By the way, all these things go up on video if you want, so you can watch the video starting noon tomorrow. It's a free app. If you search COA, it's all the videos of everything. I'll let you take a picture still. All right. This is a slide from last week. and we're talking about mentorship, how to find and keep good mentors and why they're important. If you want to grow, this is how growth occurs for human beings. You have to go from peak to peak, but you cannot avoid the down and the valley. Like you will do worse before you do better. And most of us will struggle through that process of how I was doing so well. And the better you did, the worse the pain will be. The more fanfare you have of people telling you, you are the greatest, you get awards and whatnot, you will feel like an imposter. You will feel awful as you start doing bad. And not realizing there's no other pathway to you leveling up than to go through this. And we talked about how most people prolong this valley and then eventually catapult back to the old way. Go find another job that does the same old thing versus someone up there. Sorry, that's a balloon. Sorry, I thought there were kids running in the.
There is a child.
Oh, there's a child up there.
Oh,
All
here.
right. Sorry, a good. We have like a jungle gym here that's like. Anyway,
It's built for children.
sorry, I thought it was a West Point faculty up there.
Say, I'm just gonna watch this class from the jungle gym. It's cool. It's cool.
Anyways, I digress. Let me give you a second to read this. Can you guys see this on screen? So maybe give me a thumbs up once you've read it. Megan and I spent a lot of time coaching all types of people. So this was coaching a very senior leader. Is a lot at once, but this was an email coaching session. I'll just let you digest it quick, and then I'll break it down. It's a lot to read, I know, but. I'm going to break it down. So you got the gist of it. Let me break down what's here. So as we spend time working with larger and larger organizations, the entire focus came down to how do we transform employees into leaders, as in better decision makers? And then how do we turn leaders into coaches, as in people who are able to give advice and help others, right, become better decision makers? And when an organization starts to get the flywheel of more leaders being created and then leaders turning into coaches, you're now getting ready for a new century. You're getting ready for the knowledge era. And the notion of decision making usually requires two different types of skills or muscles you have to build. One is connected to strategy, planning, goal setting, creativity, risk taking, innovation. I think of a lot of those as looking forward. Right? Being able to better navigate this unknown in front of us with impartial data is really difficult to do. You have to realize nobody has a crystal ball to be able to predict what's in front of us, yet any goal, any plan is that. You're making up how you think it's going to work out, despite having not all the data, because you can't afford to stay still. And strategy is what that's called, is a skill that's connected to decision making. The second, of course, is just speeding up. Be decisive. People are so indecisive. The organizations suffer from a lack of just decisiveness, even on little things. Well, let's meet again and talk about that. Why don't we meet about the meeting so we can talk about what we're going to do in the next meeting? Like, it's like, what? Are we trying to do anything? Like, nobody wants to put their neck out and make a decision. And there are many things you just need to learn to make a decision right now and right then. And these two things in physical sports, they call them the equivalent of a slow twitch muscle versus a fast twitch muscle. You have to exercise both. And if you want to get fit, there's something similar in your brain. You have to exercise calming down, thinking through, and making the big strategic choices, decisions correctly, but also the speeding up and making fast calls. This chart right here of level 0, 1, 2, 3 is the culmination of nearly a decade of work of research and practice and iterations of breaking down the training protocols needed for self versus team on how to build decision-making skills. There's a level 4 we're starting to add because, by the way, managing our fears matters most once you've taken risk. A lot of people have fears before they've done anything. We're not interested in that version. We're interested in the version of what happens after you stick your neck out, after you action and things don't work out. Things go wrong, what happens then? So we're focusing on those fears and especially the mistakes and how to find lessons in them. Separated on the right side with fears, it's ego. Ego shows up as the biggest thing. When things go wrong, now comes whose fault is it? Am I dumb? Are you? Am I at least smarter than you?
Well, this
Right?
is where working solo, right? Self-skills, solo, ego doesn't come up. If you're working by yourself, you could, there's no ego. Like, I'm great, right? I'm doing pretty good. But it's when you're working with team. Oh my gosh, this topic of ego has been coming up a lot lately. I think this it's one of the hardest things because it's human nature, but ego is coming up a lot.
So we're going to go into the notion of ego at a different time in more detail, because I think we can run many classes just on that point. But within the notion of the self skills for level 4, it includes things like trauma, right? A lot of us still act as if we're still going through trauma, even though it's PTSD versus post-traumatic growth is what we should have. They talk about Holocaust survivors that still act like the Holocaust is happening to them right now, even though they survived. And so how do you get to the place of growth? Imposter syndrome, broken mental models. One of the biggest things that show up for people is it's hard for you to see, or it's hard for us to accept. Most of the biggest errors in our life are repeated and thematic in nature. The good news is anything that has a repeated thematic nature is actually easier to fix. Things that are random and not connected are harder to fix, yet we need the help of someone to fix those things. Now, what's going to happen is this. I put this in red because level 0, 1, and 2, you have to do in reps enough that they become automatic. Decision-making occurs between level 3 and level 4, and you're oscillating back and forth. And that process is so difficult that if you do not have the preparedness, the readiness of the level 0, 1, 2, good luck. You're just not going to be able to do it. It's like deciding to go run a marathon when you haven't trained, right? What the hell? I like running. 26 miles? I'm sure I can try to willpower my way. I'll just try. You're going to get hurt. Your likelihood of success is very low. And even if you succeed once, it's probably not going to happen again. You have to recognize the need to do the reps to bake in 0, 1, and 2 into automatic. So let me go into a little bit of kind of some of what we're talking about. When I think about decision making, right? You have to realize 90% or more of decision making is actually in your head. And I'll tell you what I mean. And this notion of being able to debug our decision making. What's happening? How am I getting to that decision? A lot of us do that. Well, my intuition, my gut says, no, but there was a series of things that occurred, but we're not good at parsing apart what happened.
I like what Becca from Rice University, what you're saying, being scared to move, grow, make a decision based because you fear the past might happen again, or a distorted version of the past, right?
Yes.
That's all looking into the past.
So the
right? This
past
distorted-
happening, again, we're going to talk about that a lot here. This is what we're talking about. The idea of how do you half-life this thing where, I don't know if you feel sometimes like the same errors follow me. If you got fired once, when you feel like I might get fired again, you can solve for this. You can debug what happened so that you actually increase your chances of not getting fired again. But we don't do that. We instead said, it's so bad, I don't want to think about it. Well, I don't want to think about it doesn't mean you're not thinking about it. Anything that remotely looks and sounds like getting fired, you will start to act the same way, whether you realize it or not. So we're going to talk about this. But when you talk about decision making, the past, right? This little diagram, we have instructions for this. The reason why we regurgitate, memorize, we recite back like the rules and how you do something, that's what the past looks like. Well, decision making is on the right. We don't have rules for that. We don't have instructions. if you look at either your frustration with subordinates or you and your leaders being frustrated, it's because they want you to go and apply judgment. Can you just, and you know what, just use your head. Can you use your head? But sir or boss, I thought the rule was, well, the situation is different. Use your head. Use your head is another frustrating, yelling word for please think, please make decisions. Use your judgment. So this diagram's a little busy. Let me explain. We've shared something similar before. The now, right in the middle, right, is the fact. Something occurs now. And the way our brain works, when you see something, a data point, it triggers instantly into our memory bank of the past, and then it projects into the future. So it goes now, past, future. And the decision we make is connected to what we think or how we think it'll turn out into the future. And that's what we call sense making, right? Which is the precursor to good decision making. Good sense making is what leads to good decision making. So sense making is usually 90+% bouncing between how you see into the future and how you see into the past. And I want you to recognize that looking into the future, it's guesswork, my best guess based on what I know. No matter what you do, that is very hard to get right. Debugging the future, my future prediction is doable, but it's just harder than debugging the past. The past occurred, and I show you a picture of two different people. To debug what's happening in your head, looking backwards, looking forward, or looking forward, looking backwards, it requires another human being to be able to walk that through with you. And I'm telling you, you can debug together your future strategy and plans, which you should do, but you're going to find that an easier place to start is going backwards. But backwards involves more ego, more conflict, right? It's a factual audit of what happened.
It's easier as in it has a higher return for the effort, but the effort is really hard, right? That effort
Socially is harder,
yeah.
right? It's like we can debate about what's going to happen in the future, right? You want to debate about climate change, or who's going to be the next president and whatnot. You know it's anyone's guess. At some point, you'll stop arguing because it's like, it's just a guess. Go backwards. No, that's not what happened. Nope, that's not what happened. Like you try to really argue. And that's what we call conflict. The hardest conflicts are actually person to person looking backwards. The conflicts looking forward is actually relatively, easier. However, the accuracy of getting value out of the conflict is easier looking backwards, if that makes sense. Let me try to explain a little bit more. When we think of decision making, I think about this notion of, I call it a who first strategy, the idea of human capital, who matters. And how you want to think of training on the who first is, instead of going to Google, which is kind of like the average generic advice. Average generic advice is usually the dumbest and most lethal advice. Please do not make life-critical decisions by Google searching and just taking the average Google advice as the advice you should apply. You can inform yourself to, this is what the masses think, but you need to get someone who is situationally understanding your situation, right? That situational relevance matters. So the who first strategy is starting to learn how to operate, exposing my decision-making process to other people. Train in small teams, small groups of usually 10 people, and I'll go into depth in these slides, 10 people or less, to ultimately get to a place where you work as a team of 2. The smallest unit of team is 2. And I'll show you what this slide looks like as well. The foundational program that we really built in decision making was this notion of what keeps you from telling the truth and what keeps truth from coming to you. We call them red arrow behaviors. We put out signals, so it makes it very difficult for others to tell out the truth. The classic, like, I really want feedback on this presentation, but I worked so hard on this one. I was up all night, and I had a family emergency as well, and I just put my all into this presentation, but I would love your feedback. I just made it very difficult for you to give me the truth. I just want compliments. We tend to want praise. And usually when we say feedback is a fancy word for criticism, because the other thing is called recognition or praise, right? It's easy for people to give recognition and praise relative to giving criticism. And the thing that we found was human beings, we are good at preempting the criticism. In fact, we get so good at it that it bakes into our automatic so often that we don't even recognize how we do it, right? And so the program is built in a group of 10 or less people of not only identifying and working on those red arrow behaviors. It got darker somehow, right?
It did.
It'd be an eclipse.
It's amazing.
When you get to a place, what we call a TP, training partner, trust partner, thinking partner, this is kind of Mega and I in the middle. Like, there's always red, bad, but you need to be able to get to a place of enough green being you've dialed down your level of, oh my God, startled baggage and whatnot, so you can go and make the right decisions. And what you're doing is, when you get to a place of ultimately getting to a TP relationship, you are trained to be able to help each other when you feel like some of the ickiest emotions of shame and blame and whatnot, and you are constantly working on this. I'm telling you, every second that goes by, it's like plaque. Like, terror and mental chatter just grows at a very fast rate, faster than it ever has. So if you are not skilled at constantly fighting back and dialing down plaque or mental chatter, you will see it gets to a really bad place fast. So when I think about looking backwards, the two biggest areas I think about on these two Post-it notes, the easier one is in the right. We call instant replay. In this podcast with Daniel Pink, he wrote a new book, The Power of Regret. And he talks about how, I'm sure you've met people say, I have no regrets, right? I'm sure you may have even said those words at one point. So hopefully after this session, you stop saying those words, because according to Daniel Pink, the only people who have no regrets are children whose brains have not developed enough. You have brain damage, or you're a sociopath or a psychopath. Either way, one of those paths are not good, right? You will have regrets. We have just found a way to convince ourselves, I have no regrets. And so when I think about how to think of this notion of reflection, think of it in two ways. Instant replay. If I replayed what happened even in this meeting or that interaction, you will be able to recall the nuances and details of what you wish you had done better. Instant replay. No matter what you do, there's a way to do it better. But it's when time goes by, it gets harder and harder to actually remember the details of what you wish. And when those things add up, it's what we call decision baggage. And that baggage gets very, very difficult to understand what's going wrong and broken in our model.
Well, think about how we do this with kids and parenting. Your kid does something wrong. I'll talk to you about this later. And then you get to it. Maybe you get to it later. Maybe it's a difficult topic. You don't really get to it, or you eventually do. And they're like, why are we talking about this? And you can't really remember. And it's like, it just gets harder. And now it's pointing out things, and they start to get defensive. And it's awful, right? It's like the timeliness of
like
it.
we had this conversation this week coaching our team that, not to pick on, sort of single children, but if you are a single child.
I mean, like an only child.
Sorry, only child, right? Sorry, not single child. Yeah, only child. You tend to not get as much truth. And the reason is because, especially in today's day and age with human capital, like, I don't know if you're an only child, but like you just, like, versus, have you ever seen a family where it's like 5 children or even 10 or 7, so it's a large number, and they're close in age, you get away with nothing, right? Like, the notion of, like, we always say there's like just every little thing, they just pick on each other, right? Like every piece. But if you're an only child, like a lot is let go. And so
You're all
get
thinking
to a
about
place.
that right now. You're like, yeah.
I'm sure we know enough people that are only childs, and you're like, that's a little odd. And has anyone ever told you? It's the first time I'm hearing that. I'm like, it doesn't surprise me. Because parents now coddle most of their children. Why? Because it's like my pen. It's that precious, right? I'm worried about your psychology. Are you okay? But the siblings don't, right? And the minute you go to school, your classmates don't. And so there's a lot of that occurring in this change. But I say all this because as that happens, and
just
things
so you know,
do not
people who have siblings, we get trauma from it though too. It's not always so good when there's like just like constant, right? Post-traumatic not growth, but trauma from, you know,
Well,
speaking
that's
on it.
just
I have a
baggage.
twin sister,
Baggage.
so I've got a lot of baggage on
twins,
that.
it's
It's
a
not
lot of
easy
issues.
stuff.
Yes, no, there's a lot of issues in the
A lot
twin
of
side.
issues.
I mean, talk about comparison, ego,
Oh,
and everything.
God.
I mean,
Oh,
Jesus,
God.
it's still, she's going on vacation.
Oh, God, yeah.
There's already
I
like,
haven't seen her in 6
Yeah, I've been
months. All right,
coaching-
all right. We don't need to go. We don't need to talk about it right now.
Yes.
I'll just give you a little bit, but you know.
I've been coaching Megan for the battle.
It's not easy.
expected,
It is
but I
not.
hope Erin doesn't listen to this. But anyways,
She doesn't come to this.
we don't
See,
prepare
that's
Erin.
that. See, that alone, it's, you know,
Nonetheless,
nonetheless.
instant replay. You will see if you get in the reps and the habit of instant replay, you will have less decision baggage. But we all carry around massive loads of decision baggage. And if we don't start chipping away and picking at that, it impacts your ability to make decisions. Your decisions are distorted off of broken mental models, and you wonder, why do I keep repeating these errors? Or someone says you did it again. I know we all have spouses or siblings or somebody, really again? Like, it's because you have decision baggage. You're sense making things incorrectly and not catching the pattern. So, how to half-life, you know, the suffering, the fears? The key really is simple. It's exposing and disclosing. And the right who matters a lot. You try to do it solo, right? A lot of us are like, you know what? I want to figure this out myself. Well, that's when you just park it in the back of your head. I'll think about it later myself, meditate, think about it, right? I'll Google it in the quietness of my own self. Usually it leads to greater distortion and the problem gets bigger and bigger. The way I look at it, remember the show Stranger Things? I don't know if you remember this, but this guy found like I forgot what the name of the little animals in Stranger Things, but he finds this little boy finds this cute little thing. It's all about feeding it. Well, that thing turns into, I think, the Demogorgon or something. It's like a demon. Like, that's what happens when you hide this icky stuff. It looks okay and harmless to start, but it keeps eating, and it feeds on your mental chatter. And every time you Google it, it's going to get worse too. And so staying and keeping these broken, icky things makes it grow very much like Stranger Things, and you're growing demogorgons in your head. Then the flip side, and Daniel Pink talks about this too in his thing on study on reflection, talking to the wrong person. We talked about that last week. For most of us, our spouses tend to be, or even parents, the worst people to get advice from, because they have distorted views of our situation at work. So unless you happen to work with them, they have distorted views because they only see what you show. Some of us come and always tell only the good stuff, or some of us come and only bitch, or some of us try to act like we show nothing, but they see in our behaviors when we're down usually that something is wrong, and they're piecing the puzzle together thinking they see it all because they see it every day. But the reality is it's distorted. And so the notion that tends to occur and shows up in the research, when you talk to the wrong person, it's often called venting. That thought grows. If you have a positive view, it will grow bigger and you will be like, oh my God, I can't see how we could possibly fail. Go do it. Or if you go on the negative side, it does the flip side. You're like, oh my God, it's worse than I thought. That's it. We got to eject. What you need is advice.
Like I said, it well, right? Because you pick people who will validate you, right? So when you talk to the wrong person, and whatever signals you put out, they're going to validate the imbalance.
Oh,
so if you're like, I want.
No, but can I tell you what happens? What's interesting? Less deliberately than you think. It happens more accidentally. We are human. Our brain is wired to recognize patterns. If you talk to someone and you got advice on something difficult you're struggling with, and then you Google it and it was the same, you're like, that's it. It must be right. I talked to someone, right? And say I talked to my parents that gave me advice, and then I talk to a spouse that say the same thing, but I'm on the subway and someone gives me the same advice, I'm like, that's it. 3 different people, wow, it must be correct. That's not true. Just because people say the same thing, and human beings, remember, are wired. As you talk about suffering and struggle, they're looking at your face for, what do you want to hear?
Right.
How do I make you feel better? And so the act of doing that, most aren't really going to try to understand what's happening. The notion of challenging to get the truth is a painful, icky, conflict-driven thing that requires a lot of work through comparison ego. That is the kind of advice we need, and that who is hard to find. There's a good podcast on this that that Daniel Pink in his new book. But I think
That's it. That was the last slide, you guys. You just got 3 presentations
in one.
in one. We just did like a.
Exactly what you
did it.
wanted, right?
You did it.
Yes, I'm sure you were like, I preferred one presentation. You can give me feedback in the feedback app, but
It's good to see
Questions,
Cindy
thoughts?
is here. We did the blue zone. We'll have to share more, but Cindy is here. We talked about you, Cindy.
yeah, in the
Um,
chat
Yeah,
online,
if
let's
you have
see.
questions. I know that a few people that had questions I know had to leave already, but I know Chris Schwartz had a question. If Fariza, if you're still here, I know you had a question about starting in a new organization and transferring to a new organization, learning. I don't know if you're still here, if you want to unmute.
Hi, this is Fariza. I was asking about um, ad- adapting to the painful moments when your experience is painful as you are learning, growing, stretching what you're capable of, but also probably in a new environment or a new situation. That's why you're growing and learning. How do you get through that when it just feels so painful every day? And maybe it's not even, maybe the things that you are learning are also not aligned with your own beliefs on how things should work, or, I'll stop talking now. I'm starting to ramble, but what do you think about those situations?
Great question. There's a guy we spend time with. He's a fascinating individual. His name is Jia Zhang, and he created this whole thing on
Busters.
like rejection therapy. If you ever look, people hate getting rejected, whether it's applying for jobs or asking someone to go out with you, hate rejection. And so this question of how do I deal with this fear of rejection? Every piece of advice and research points to the same place. Go on a program of 100 days of trying to get rejected. And so he has a talk, even in a co-op, about this, talking about, so he literally was like, oh God, I'm going to go on this journey to go and deliberately get a no, right? So the first one he did was asking some security guy at his workplace, hey, dude, can I borrow $100? And the guy's like, no. And then he's like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have asked. Then he pauses and says, why'd you say no? It's like an odd question. He's like, and so then like the guy starts explaining and he sees that, he might have said yes if I asked the question differently. So he goes on this journey to try to get these no's, and he does this most crazy stuff. He goes to a police officer in a car, says, can I drive your car around the block? And the police officer says, sure, go ahead, right? Till like he knocks on some guy's door in Texas with a soccer ball and says, can I play soccer in your backyard? And sure, come in. He goes on a commercial airline and says, can I give the safety announcement? They're more likely to listen to me than you. And the flight attendant says, sure. It's like insane stuff where what he realized was he's like, I tried to get 100 no's and he had to notch it up. And he had to make it harder and harder. And like roughly half said yes. But they were very unexpected. The ones he thought that would say no would say yes. And the ones he thought that, like, it was hard to predict. But the notion of, they call it exposure therapy. I think about reps. This thing you're talking about, whatever, that thing that makes your hands sweaty, that thing that startles you or shuts your brain off if that happens, that difficult question you get that makes you think like, I can't think. How do I deliberately go at it, maybe even twice a week minimum? We always say start on a Monday, go do it, and then try to do it one more time before the end of the week. Do that repeatedly for anywhere, like maybe 12 to 13 weeks, twice a week minimum. It won't have the impact. And then once that happens, that's what I would call preparedness or readiness. Now we can get a proper score on what to do. I don't know if that.
I mean, I was just thinking the notion of the discomfort, the way you were saying that you feel pain every day, and maybe this is not aligned with my own beliefs. You know that whatever it is, you didn't go into the detail of what it is that makes you so uncomfortable, but it's hitting a nerve. Like there's something there, and it's probably connected to what you were saying, Charlie, which is something in the past. So whatever company you worked at before, like something that's happening now, Frieza, is being triggered. Something now, whatever you're going through, triggered something from the past that's now making you feel like, I don't know if I want to do this. I'm not sure it's aligned with my own beliefs. And maybe that's true, right? But there's probably there's a pattern in the past, no?
Frieza, I don't know if you want to add in any more color, like if you get more specific,
We can help you.
we can help even more.
Oh, sure. It's not so terrible where, my personal beliefs um, are dragging me down on a daily basis. It's nothing so drastic. It's more along the lines of I'm a little newer to the organization. I have a fresher perspective, but um, the things that I have to do on the daily basis, like for example, I typed in earlier into the chat, I constantly have to check in on people. I don't want to do that. I don't want to ask constantly, is it done? Is it done? Are you done yet? When will it be done? Can you give me an estimate on your percentage? I feel like a micromanager and I don't want to do that. But sometimes I'm in situations where I do, and I just wish there was a more efficient way that I could gain this information. That's just one example, but
In that
I'm
example,
having to do things I don't want to.
in the checking in on people, what's usually baked in a lot of that? First, you're saying people as if they're all the exact same, and this idea of the players and the who first strategy. I would recommend separating. We say instead of doing an ABC prioritization, do a CAB, and in reality, it's just a C versus an A. Who is the one that you're checking in because they're doing it wrong, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, you already know, like, they're going to probably do it wrong, and you're checking in because you're trying to, that's a backwards way to micromanage, right? And kind of, they're not using their heads and whatnot. Is there a visceral C mindset of an individual separated from, you might check in, but someone who surprises you in the upside? It's almost like, who in the last couple times have surprised you on the downside, and who has surprised you on the upside? And simply by even separating that, and you might say, look, they all have surprised me on the downside. Well, who has surprised you less on the downside? And separate, because you might approach them differently. And oftentimes, once you separate that, if you go in and check in with a person that surprised you on the upside, that conversation tends to get very interesting, because that's where usually that picture I showed you when, two people helping process what happened, that's a productive conversation. It tends to go into, so, hey, can you give me the logic why you did that and what were the assumptions? I have some additional thoughts. It feels like a productive brainstorm where we advanced something.
This is where people always think email is such a bad, oh my God, too many emails. If there's that many people that you need to keep checking in with and you're like so frustrated, at some point you can create, there's so many good things about email that you can create group emails of weekly updates where you're not chasing them. They're sending you a weekly update.
So I was going to say the A versus the C.
Yeah.
The C should be updating you on the template and the format you want every week. Right. And so it depends on how you want it. If you want to know what they want to do, their intention or plan, get an update at Monday that's basically like, here's my plan of what to accomplish for the week. That's a Monday update email. On Friday, how did it go? And write it against that email, right? So what did they get accomplished? That's a way where you don't have to bother checking in. It's just standard process, right?
What they plan to get
right?
done.
And you're doing all of it. And the power of email is it's asynchronous. Like, what is awful about all the chat type programs is that it like gets lost in conversation. The email, you can digest when you are ready, when you are in the right mindset, and you can respond when you're in the right mindset. On the flip side, the individual, the A individual, that's an individual, maybe you care even less about the email. That's the person I want to actually talk to. Exactly. Because I want to go off script and go off in different tangents and directions, because that tends to fire you up.
This is where you don't have to call everybody and follow up with everybody in person. That's where all those blunt rules of you must talk to all your people and check in with them daily is like just so not smart, right? That's just bad.
And I cannot emphasize investing in the template. Because if you don't, you're going to get random essays of, let me tell you why I'm so great and why everything that went wrong wasn't my fault. And it's not so good.
All right. Just take a question here and then we'll go. Anybody here in the room with us?
I think Lokia has a mic. Anybody has a reaction, question, thoughts?
Reaction, question, thought, or are you just starving?
Students usually fire their hands up right away. So I know this is faculty, so I'm going to expect you to be a little more scared to speak up. But
it's taunting you right now. It's taunting.
No reaction here? Question? Come on. Somebody has something. Don't leave it to the most senior guy who's going to be forced to ask the question just because Everett has to, but nobody? Guys, you guys are not looking like the elite West Point that I was expecting.
Go on.
Oh, okay, so, all right.
Is that on? Can you guys hear on Laura can't hear, no.
I mean, just speak and then we'll
We'll repeat.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm, mm. Mm, mm, mm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're asking about this. So the question is more about so much. We talked so much about raising CEOs. I don't know why my dad never does. So raising CEOs out of public schools. What about parents? Why can't we build better parenting? Why do you have to be a CEO? Why is it the bumper sticker?
Yeah, like first, I mean, I wouldn't read too hard into like the idea of
Sure.
building a program that's as elite and accessible for like the 3-4 stars of the military or C-level executives of Fortune 500 to build a version that is accessible to like an underprivileged public school child who also gives an accelerated path to literally become CEO if they choose to. It's not to say, nope, that's it, otherwise it's failure. That's not the message. I think that was what we call version 1 of 2 stickers, right? Better decisions in seconds, right? For the people who run the world, less privileged person, and like the same type of program that'll let you accelerate to that level and train at that level. So kind of that was the version 1 sticker. But putting down, it's interesting. There was a military leader who ever said, rarely do you find someone who's a great leader who's also not a great parent. The connection of the you as you, like winning today as an individual, as a good decision maker, a good leader judgment, it's not to say it's connected to pay and title only. Like we all have to, and it's confusing as hell. I mean, even as a parent, the level of advice in Google and every other parent, and I mean, the pressure you feel to basically everything tells you that you suck. You're doing everything wrong, right? And there's like, it's like try to go on a diet, right? Good luck. I mean, Jesus. I mean, what like, if you pretty much eat nothing, then they'll probably say, okay, that's probably better and closer to like, I don't know, trying to get it right. My point being like, we're inundated with advice everywhere. And somehow through that, we have to navigate and we have to make decisions and make calls. And when you're parenting a child, you don't get to freeze, right? There's a cost to freezing, right? There's a cost to paralysis of not deciding, not coaching, not guiding. And so it's the same skills of, good judgment and decision-making as a leader for subordinates. Well, you need similar skills in parenting. And when we talk about cross-domain coaching, we're looking at that as well. Like kind of why we even have like children's gyms and everything built in here. The same person shows up.
God, it's so hard.
So
First, I'm like looking at
what's that?
thinking of Jim Lear because Cindy's here too. But remember Jim always said the best kill it and everything, right?
Yeah.
The best, the most elite in their category. I'm cutting in and out, but the most elite in their category kill it in everything they do. And you're like, how do they do that?
So there was a nuance that we shared. And if you hear this, like everyone has the same 24 hours in a day, how is it possible? You think when you get to that very top, there's a massive trade-off, right? And I think in the military, we've seen a lot of people say, I don't want that life. I don't want to be that 3-4 star because they had to sacrifice everything and now they're divorced for the 3rd time and everything bad occurred. And what was interesting that Jim Lear had shared with us in the data was this. When you look at number 2s, number 3s, number 4s, and they're still very high in whatever field, that statement was often true. They had to make these massive trade-offs. But number 1s, generally speaking, were killing it in everything they touch, friendships, home, work. I mean, it was like one of those, how is that possible? And the key was in their automatic. The reason why even in the decision making, the rituals, the reps, the habits, when you upgrade your automatic, you no longer have to spend the same amount of energy to do something. And there's a lot of things that we do in our automatic in the wrong way. We avoid conflict. You know, we walk in eggshells. We don't correct, you know, like, and we lie a lot everywhere without even realizing we're doing it. Our default answer is, yes, I agree. I'm like, really? Like, no, you just say it before you even heard the whole question. Like, and so when you start to recognize and start to build in your automatic more of these foundational upgrades, not for the industrial age. The industrial age was automatic when I wake up and clock in and automatic when I clock out. You probably just tire by 4:59 because you know you're about to clock out, or you might get thirsty for beer or whatever it is you do after. Like, that was all in our automatic. It's a different automatic we need. And that automatic was the key. And so that thread we saw in the best of Olympic athletes, medical surgeons, even the best in the military, the best in CEOs, the best in nonprofits, the best even of parents, they were very deliberate. And they always say in decision making, look, when you make a big decision, how seriously do we take it? We weigh it out, get advice and all that stuff. We map it out even on paper or computers and whatnot. But small decisions, we don't think about it, right? You go for coffee, you get small, medium, large. What is it? Just decide on the spot at times. Habits, things that repeat in our lives, rituals, are small decisions done so often, right? Similar decisions. They're as important as big decisions, but we don't put the same
You
mind share.
accumulated over 52 weeks and you kept doing that. That's a big decision. For instance, we call it the Home Hero Program, F15. The first 15 minutes you walk in and you see your family, those 15 minutes matter a lot. Maybe not every day, but at minimum of twice a week, you have to bring your full everything you have in those 15 minutes to your family.
Mhm.
And can you train to do that? Can you do that, right? That matters. And it seems small, you know, maybe that's 30 minutes a week, but can you do that? When you're exhausted and you're on 2 hours of sleep, can you bring it and play the Monopoly or play the thing that you're like, God, this is the last thing I want to do? Can you have the difficult conversations with your kids? Can you take the drive and not eye to eye, but shoulder to shoulder, have the difficult conversation, a thing you don't really want to talk about? Can you do that? And do you practice that? And that's a weekly.
And
That's the
so like
examples.
we literally coach a lot of leaders, and we call it F15 because we do a lot of work in the military. It's a plane, right? But it stands for first 15 minutes.
He knows it's a plane.
Right? No, I mean, just
So the Army knows about
what you don't
planes
know, right?
and planes.
it's not a keyboard function. I think it goes to F12, but
This is true.
the first 15 minutes,
I have an F15.
it matters. Oh, you have?
I do. I have an F15 on
My
my
keyboard's missing
keyboard.
an F15, but first 15 minutes, you'll see when you walk in the house, right? Exhausted from work, yelled at, or whatever day it is, right? Yeah, you don't have any more left. But if you go in as if you're meeting the I don't know, 4-star, general of the army, I'm picking on, right? First 15 minutes, we can all do it for 15 minutes. You know, in physical fitness, they say you can do almost anything for 30 seconds. With our mind, 15 minutes, you can do it. Do it. Like, just bring it as if you're meeting the most important person in the world. And then turn off if you want. And you'll see everyone just gets back to their own chores and iPads or whatever they want. But if you do that, most people remember the association of the interaction with you, the first impression. Every first impression, if it's like that, that adds up.
Okay,
Sorry.
we're gonna go. That's all we have. Next week. Sorry, we could go on forever.
So I was going to say, by the way, 3 o'clock, all the stuff push and challenge, bring it at 3 o'clock. We will go on a more close, we can tear apart whatever you want later. So
Next week for our Lip Army online here. Next week, Charlie and I were just getting back from our vacation. So we're gonna do a live
yeah. Oh,
thing.
sorry.
You do.
Yeah. So we're out on vacation right up till Wednesday. So we're coming right back for Lip on Thursday. Our thought was to go, and we've done this in the past, some of the classes, do like live coaching deep into challenges and issues,
So bring
kind of
it.
like what Fariza just brought.
Mhm.
So
Bring it.
bring your most prickly, challenging, it's like kind of like this is impossible ones. Bring it.
And if
Like,
you're
we love
LA
those.
and you're
Terry's
LHF and
already
you don't
talked.
give detail, we're not gonna be able to
Yeah.
help. So
Yeah, so if you give a generic one that's too generic, I will Google search and give you back what Google
that's
says.
leadership in theory. This
Yes.
is leadership in practice.
But if you want kind of a point of view where, you know, we call it super pattern matching. We have had the privilege of tens of thousands of different types of challenges. We can't tell you everything, but there's like very few things we're like, ooh, never seen that one. There's like so many different variations we've seen. So we will use our depth of reps and experience to help. So
Yeah.
bring your real struggling stuff, whatever it might be, homework, child, parenting, friend.
It was so nice
Doesn't
to
matter
meet
what.
some of you guys who are new. Arshi Zahid, oh my gosh, I loved this from Pennsylvania. That was the one with the gold bond. This is,
Oh.
anywho. All right, thanks you guys. We'll see
Yeah.
you next week.
Those